In a small, seemingly peaceful town, a black boy named Malik Johnson sat in the cold, sterile courtroom. His heart thumped loudly in his chest as the weight of the accusation settled on his young shoulders. He had been charged with a crime he didn't commit, a robbery that took place 2 weeks prior, a robbery he couldn't have possibly been involved in. As the prosecutor laid out the case, a torrent of confusion swirled in Malik's mind. He had never even been near the scene. But the evidence, false evidence, was enough to bind him. It felt like his future had been taken away. The judge presiding over his case was a middle-aged white woman, Judge Clara Thompson. She was a stern figure, but beneath her professional demeanor, Malik could see a flicker of something else, a strange, unspoken connection. It haunted him in the quiet moments when their eyes met. He didn't know what it was, but there was something about her that made him feel like he wasn't a stranger. Perhaps it was the way she looked at him, or perhaps it was the flicker of guilt that she seemed to suppress each time she glanced his way. Malik shook it off, though. The trial was long and grueling. The courtroom seemed stacked against him, with the jury listening intently to the prosecutor's every word, and the defense struggling to find a way to argue the evidence. Malik sat there, his hands trembling, his mind racing. He knew he was innocent. But would anyone believe him? Would they see through the fabricated lies? His attorney, a young man named Ryan, tried to explain the lack of any direct connection to the crime, but each attempt to poke holes in the case seemed to fall flat. When Malik was called to the stand, his throat tightened. His voice shook as he spoke, but he did his best to explain his truth. He had been at home with his grandmother on the night of the robbery. He had no alibi other than her word, but she wasn't there to testify. The prosecutor painted a picture of Malik as a delinquent, a product of a broken family, incapable of making the right choices. The more the prosecutor spoke, the more Malik began to feel the weight of the system pressing down on him. He had no choice but to keep fighting. In the midst of the trial, a strange thought emerged in Malik's mind. It was an odd feeling, something he couldn't quite place. He had often wondered about his mother. She was a part of his life that had always been missing. He never knew who she was, never knew why she left him with his grandmother. He had been raised with love, but there was always a question lingering in the back of his mind. A curiosity that never quite faded. Could it be that the Judge Clara Thompson was somehow connected to him? The more he thought about it, the more the idea gnawed at him. His mind raced, the weight of the trial making it impossible to think clearly. But in the midst of the chaos, an idea formed. What if he was wrong? What if his mother was closer than he thought? He glanced at Judge Thompson again, studying her face. There was something familiar about the curve of her jaw, the set of her eyes. He couldn't explain it, but something about her felt like home. The connection was there, but it was so distant, so faint, that it was hard to grasp. Was it possible that the woman presiding over his fate was the person who had abandoned him all those years ago? Malik's heart pounded as the idea consumed him. He was no longer just a boy trying to clear his name. He was a child searching for the mother he had never known. The truth was elusive, but the bond he felt with Judge Thompson was undeniable. It was as if fate had placed her in his path for a reason. Maybe it was her own guilt, her own inner struggle, that kept her from seeing the truth. Malik wasn't sure, but he had to speak up. He had to ask, even if it cost him everything. With a sudden clarity, Malik stood up from the witness stand. His voice was steady, but the words he spoke were unexpected. "Judge Thompson," he began, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're my mother." The courtroom fell silent. The air thickened with tension, as everyone turned to look at him. Judge Thompson's face went pale. Her eyes widened in shock, her expression unreadable. The prosecutor looked confused, but Malik could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. He had just dropped a bombshell, and there was no going back now. For a long moment, Judge Thompson didn't speak. She simply stared at Malik, as if trying to make sense of what he had just said. Her eyes flickered to the defense attorney, then to the prosecutor, before settling back on Malik. There was something in her gaze now, something more than confusion. There was a recognition, something deeply buried within her. Malik felt a surge of emotion rise up inside of him. Was she going to deny it? Would she brush off his words as some desperate cry for attention? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Thompson spoke. Her voice trembled, a rare break in her composed exterior. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, almost as if talking to herself. This isn't possible." Malik shook his head, his voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "I know who I am, Judge Thompson. I know who you are." He wasn't sure what to expect, but he felt a strange sense of certainty wash over him. His voice grew louder as he repeated, "You're my mother." The tension in the courtroom was palpable. People exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to proceed. The judge remained motionless, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, but the slight shake in her posture betrayed her growing discomfort. She had not expected this. No one had. Malik could see that the words were stirring something inside her, something that she had likely buried deep within herself. It was clear that she was struggling, torn between the role she had to play in the courtroom and something more personal, something that seemed to be calling her. "I'm sorry," Judge Thompson finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. This can't be real." Malik took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why did you leave me with Grandma?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The judge closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. It was the first sign of emotion she had shown throughout the entire trial. She wasn't just the judge anymore. She was a woman caught in the crossfire of her own buried secrets. At that moment, the courtroom door opened, and a new figure entered, the DNA expert who had been brought in to analyze the evidence. He carried a small folder in his hand, but his entrance was overshadowed by the emotional intensity of what had just unfolded. Without a word, he approached the judge, placing the folder on the bench in front of her. "We've just received the results," he said. His voice broke the heavy silence in the room, but his words didn't carry the relief everyone had been hoping for. Instead, they brought something even more shocking. The expert looked up at Judge Thompson, then at Malik. "Your DNA samples were tested against the boys," he began, his voice steady. "And the results are undeniable." The judge's face drained of color as the words sank in. Malik's heart raced in his chest. Could it be true? Could this woman, who had presided over his trial, actually be his mother? The expert continued, his words becoming more and more damning. "The test confirms it. You are his biological mother." The courtroom erupted in chaos, but Malik barely heard the murmurs of shock and disbelief. His entire world had just shifted. He looked at Judge Thompson, his mother, and saw something in her eyes that had not been there before. It wasn't just guilt anymore, it was something far more vulnerable. For the first time in his life, Malik felt like he wasn't alone. There was someone in the world who shared his blood, his history. Even though their worlds had collided in such an unexpected and painful way, Malik couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope rising inside him. The courtroom was in disarray. People whispered, murmured, and exchanged glances, unsure of what to do next. But for Malik, the noise around him faded as he locked eyes with Judge Thompson, who had just been revealed as his mother. The woman who had abandoned him was now standing before him, vulnerable and shattered, with the weight of a truth she had hidden for years pressing down on her. She had once been the figure of authority, the one who had held his fate in her hands, but now, she was simply a woman who had lost everything. Malik's heart pounded, but his emotions were a whirlpool of conflicting feelings. He had spent so many years wondering where she was, why she left him behind. He had grown up with his grandmother's love, but there was always a void, a space where his mother should have been. Now it felt like that space was being filled with a strange mix of anger and longing. His mind was racing, the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. But despite everything, there was something else there, a yearning for answers, for connection. Judge Thompson stood motionless, as if her body couldn't process the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Her hands trembled as she slowly removed her glasses, her face pale and etched with regret. The courtroom fell into an unsettling silence. Even the prosecutor, who had been so focused on condemning Malik, seemed unsure of how to proceed. The expert's words echoed in the air, and Malik couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. The truth was no longer a secret. But what would happen now? What would she say to him? Would she apologize? Why? Malik's voice was a whisper barely audible, but it was all he could manage. His eyes never left Judge Thompson's face. He needed to hear it from her, the reason she had left him behind, why she had never come back. His heart ached with the weight of the question, the years of unanswered pain hanging heavily between them. Judge Thompson swallowed hard, her lips quivering as she took a tentative step toward him. "I didn't know how to be a mother," she confessed, her voice cracked with emotion. "I was too afraid. Too ashamed. Malik's chest tightened at her words. She had been afraid? He had always imagined a different reason, something worse, something that would confirm his worst fears. But hearing her admit to her own fear, her own shame, shook him to his core. She wasn't a monster. She was just human, a woman who had made a decision she couldn't take back. Malik felt a strange pang of compassion deep inside him, despite everything. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a lost cause after all. Maybe there was hope for them, even after all these years. Tears welled up in Judge Thompson's eyes, and she took another step forward, this time closer to Malik. She hesitated, as though not knowing what to do next. Her hands reached out, trembling slightly. Malik's heart skipped a beat, unsure if he should allow her to get that close. He had spent so many years living without her, learning to cope with the emptiness. But something in him urged him to listen, to see if there was a chance at healing. Could this broken connection be mended? Could forgiveness be found? He wasn't sure, but he wanted to find out. "Malik," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance." She paused, her eyes filled with raw emotion. "But I never stopped thinking about you. I thought of you every day, and I regretted the day I walked away from you." The weight of her confession hit Malik like a wave. Her regret was real. She hadn't forgotten him, hadn't abandoned him without a second thought. That realization made his chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. She had been carrying this burden for all these years. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I was too scared. I was too young, too lost in my own pain. I thought leaving you with your grandmother would be the best thing, but I see now how wrong I was." Malik's mind spun with the weight of her words. His mother had been lost in her own pain just like him. She had tried to make a choice that would protect him, but in doing so, she had left him with a void that no one else could fill. His heart softened at the thought. Could he understand that kind of fear? Malik took a deep breath, his emotions swirling. The anger he had felt earlier began to fade, replaced by something he hadn't expected: compassion. His mother was broken, just like him. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying now. She had made mistakes, but hadn't they all? He had spent so long wondering where she was, and now, after all these years, here she was, standing before him, vulnerable and willing to face the truth. His heart began to open, slowly, cautiously. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," Malik said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I want to try. I want to know you, Mom. I want to understand who you are, what happened." His words were raw, honest, and filled with a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Judge Thompson's face softened, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've lost so much time, but I don't want to lose you too." Malik nodded slowly, his heart still heavy with the weight of everything. The years of abandonment, the pain of growing up without her, would not disappear overnight. But this moment was the first step toward healing. It wasn't an easy path, and there was no guarantee of how things would turn out. But Malik knew one thing: he wasn't alone anymore. There was a connection between them now, fragile but real. And maybe that was enough to start rebuilding what had been broken. The courtroom remained silent as the emotional exchange unfolded, the spectators witnessing something far beyond a legal case. This was a story of redemption, of a family torn apart by fear and shame, and the chance to heal that had finally arrived. Malik could feel the weight of the world shifting on his shoulders. His future, which had once seemed so uncertain, was now filled with a glimmer of possibility. His mother, the woman who had once been a distant figure in his life, was now standing before him, ready to try and be the mother he had always longed for. In that moment, Malik realized that justice wasn't just about a verdict or a sentence. It wasn't just about proving innocence or guilt. It was about understanding, about healing wounds that ran deeper than the surface. And while the courtroom had been where he fought for his freedom, it was also where he had found something more precious: his mother, and the possibility of a future where they could finally be together, in spite of the past. "Can we start over?" Malik asked quietly, his voice uncertain but hopeful. Judge Thompson's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I would like nothing more." The courtroom, which had once felt so cold and hostile, now felt like a place where something beautiful could grow. The pain wasn't gone, but it was no longer the only thing that defined their relationship. There was hope now, and with hope, anything was possible. For the first time in years, Malik felt the weight of his past lifting, not because the world had suddenly become fair, but because he had taken control of his own story. The truth was out. He was not just a boy in a courtroom. He was a son, standing before his mother, ready to build a new beginning together. The silence in the courtroom lingered for a moment before it was broken by a single sob from Judge Thompson. Malik stood there, unsure of what to do, but something in her raw vulnerability stirred him. He had spent so much time building walls, protecting himself from the pain of abandonment, but here she was, not asking for forgiveness, but offering her brokenness, hoping for a chance to make things right. Malik's heart softened further, and he found himself taking a small step toward her. He didn't know what to say, but he knew the first step was simply being there. Judge Thompson wiped away her tears, trying to regain her composure, but the weight of the moment was too much to hide. "I never wanted you to feel like you weren't wanted," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought I was protecting you by leaving. I thought you'd be better off without me." Malik felt the truth of her words, but he also felt the truth of his own pain. She had made a choice, one he didn't agree with, but it wasn't because she didn't love him. It was because she was afraid. That fear they shared. "You're here now," Malik said quietly, his voice firm but gentle. "We can figure this out together." The words sounded so simple, but they carried a depth that he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. They both needed to heal, and that healing couldn't happen without truth, without vulnerability. She had been so afraid of hurting him, but by denying him a chance to know her, she had caused him pain in ways she hadn't realized. He couldn't change the past, but together, they could move forward. He could forgive her, but it would take time, and trust. "I don't know if I'll ever understand why you left me," Malik admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But I'm willing to try and understand you, if you'll let me." There was something in his words that cut through the tension in the room. He wasn't asking for her to explain away the past. He was simply offering her the chance to be a part of his future. Judge Thompson's face softened, and for the first time since the trial began, she smiled, tentatively, but it was a smile. "I would like nothing more than that," she said, her voice breaking slightly. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Malik felt a shift inside of him. For the first time, he didn't feel like a victim of his circumstances. He didn't feel like the world was closing in on him. He felt empowered by his ability to choose how to react, choose how to move forward. His mother was here, offering herself to him in a way he hadn't imagined possible. She wasn't perfect, but neither was he. Together, they could navigate this messy, beautiful journey of healing. Judge Thompson turned toward the rest of the courtroom, her eyes scanning the faces that had once condemned Malik. "This trial," she began, her voice now steadier, "has never been about the truth. It's been about fear. Fear that we can't face our past. Fear that the truth will tear us apart. But now, I see that it is the truth that will set us free." The prosecutor and the jury sat in stunned silence as her words sunk in. This was no longer just a trial, it was a moment of reckoning for everyone in that room. Judge Thompson had just made a choice that would change her life. Malik couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride for his mother. She was owning her truth, something he had never expected from her. It took so much courage to stand there and admit her mistakes, to acknowledge the years she had lost. It was something Malik had struggled to do himself, but now, he understood what it meant to be vulnerable. To admit that you're human. That you make mistakes. That you can still choose to be better. He was learning to forgive her, just as she was learning to forgive herself. As the trial wound to a close, the judge excused herself from the bench, leaving the room for a brief moment of solitude. Malik sat down in the seat where he had stood just moments before, his heart still racing. His thoughts were a jumble question swirling, emotions clashing. But amid it all, one thought stood clear: his life was about to change. He didn't know how or what the future held, but he knew it was going to be different. There was a chance now, a real chance for him to have the kind of family he had always dreamed of, even if it took time to rebuild. When Judge Thompson returned, she addressed the room with a quiet authority, but this time, her words were filled with compassion, not judgment. "The charges against Malik Johnson are dismissed," she said firmly. "He is free to go." The room erupted in applause, but for Malik, the victory wasn't in the verdict, it was in the connection that was forming between him and his mother. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about reclaiming the parts of himself he had long buried. It was about forgiveness, about hope, about love. Walking out of the courtroom, Malik felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The crowd outside, reporters and onlookers, had gathered in the hallway, eager for any details about the shocking turn of events. But Malik didn't care about the spectacle. He only cared about the woman walking beside him, his mother. The woman who had tried to protect him in her own flawed way, and now was standing beside him as they both stepped into a new future together. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't alone in the world. As they walked down the steps of the courthouse, Judge Thompson placed her hand gently on Malik's shoulder. "I know this won't fix everything," she said softly, "but it's a start. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to be the mother you deserve." Malik looked at her, her face still lined with years of regret, but also with the faintest hint of hope. "We'll take it one step at a time," he replied, his voice steady. "We don't need to fix everything all at once. We just need to try." And that was enough for now. They drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind that smelled of fresh coffee and pancakes. It felt like the beginning of something new, something warm. Malik and his mother sat across from each other, the weight of the past still lingering between them but softened by the bond they were starting to rebuild. There were no grand speeches, no promises of perfection. Just two people, trying to understand each other, trying to move forward, one small conversation at a time. And in that quiet moment, Malik knew that they had already started to heal, even if it was only the first step. As they shared a meal, laughing about little things and beginning to share their stories, Malik realized that he had more than just his freedom now. He had his family. It wasn't the family he had imagined as a child, but it was a family nonetheless. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. And maybe that was all that mattered in the end. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to know what the future held. He just needed to keep walking forward with an open heart, trusting that the love he had always longed for was finally within reach. After lunch, they sat in the car in the parking lot, the air crisp and cool around them. Malik turned to his mother and asked, "So what now?" Judge Thompson smiled, her eyes filled with something like hope. "Now we start again," she said softly. "We take our time, and we build something real. No rush. Just one step at a time." And as Malik looked into her eyes, he saw not just a mother, but a woman who was ready to be the person he had always needed her to be. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt like they were both ready to walk it together. Malik sat back in the passenger seat, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. It was strange to think that just hours before, he had been a young man facing the crushing weight of a false accusation. Now here he was, sharing a moment with the woman who had once been a stranger, the woman who had been absent from his life for so long. It was like waking up from a bad dream, only to find the world had shifted and now, somehow, there was a chance for something new, something real. As the car started moving, they drove through the streets of the town, the familiarity of the landscape almost surreal to Malik. He had spent so many years disconnected from this place, trying to outrun the ghosts of his past, but now it felt different. There was a new sense of belonging creeping in, a sense that he was finally stepping into the life he was meant to have, even if it hadn't come in the way he expected. He was walking beside his mother now, and that was enough to make everything feel right. "I've missed so much, Malik," Judge Thompson said, her voice soft, almost like a confession. "I missed watching you grow, seeing you become the young man you are. And it breaks my heart that I wasn't there for any of it." Malik could hear the sorrow in her voice, but there was something else there too, something hopeful, something that told him that maybe, just maybe, they could still create memories together. "I don't want you to be sorry," Malik said, his voice gentle but firm. "What matters now is what we do from here. We've got time." He felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Malik had spent years feeling abandoned by a mother who had made a choice that had hurt him deeply. But now, he felt the power of forgiveness rising in him. It wasn't instantaneous, and it wasn't easy, but in this moment, he realized that letting go of the anger was the only way to move forward. They couldn't erase the past, but they could start writing a new chapter. And the words they wrote together could be filled with healing, love, and understanding. "I don't even know where to begin," Judge Thompson said, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "I don't know how to be the mother you needed." Malik looked at her, his expression softening. "We'll figure it out together," he replied. "We don't have to have all the answers. We just need to be honest with each other and take it one day at a time." The simplicity of his words seemed to settle the air between them, and for the first time in years, Malik felt the walls around his heart start to come down. "I never wanted to hurt you, Malik," she continued, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I was wrong." Malik nodded, understanding more than she knew. He had spent so many years replaying her absence in his mind, questioning her motives, but now he understood that pain had driven her decisions, just as pain had driven so many of his own choices. "We both made mistakes," Malik said quietly. "But it doesn't have to define us. It doesn't have to be the end." They arrived at a small park, a place Malik had frequented as a child when his grandmother would take him on quiet afternoons. The swings creaked gently in the wind, the same old trees lined the walkways, and the sun shone down in soft golden hues. It was a familiar sight, but with his mother by his side, it felt like a completely new place. This wasn't just a park from his childhood, it was a place where they could start building new memories together. "Do you remember coming here with Grandma?" Malik asked, a small smile tugging at his lips. Judge Thompson nodded, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. "I remember hearing about it," she said with a soft chuckle. "She always told me you loved the swings." Malik laughed, the sound bright and free. She wasn't wrong. He paused, a thought settling in his mind. Maybe we can come here sometimes. Together. The idea of sharing this space, of creating new traditions, made his heart swell with a hope he hadn't felt before. As they walked through the park, they talked about everything and nothing all at once. They spoke about the small ordinary things that made life beautiful: the feel of the wind in your hair, the sound of a bird singing, the way the sun felt on your face. These simple moments were the ones they had missed out on, and now in the present, they were making up for lost time. The conversation was easy, unforced, like they had always known each other. Even without the years of memories, they found a rhythm that felt natural. "I can't believe this is happening," Malik said, his voice full of awe. "It feels like I'm dreaming, like everything has shifted in a way I never expected." Judge Thompson smiled at him, her eyes filled with something warm and sincere. "I never thought I'd be here either," she admitted. "But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. The world was changing, but it felt right. Everything about this moment was exactly where they were supposed to be. As they continued to walk, they came upon a small bench beneath an old oak tree. They sat together in the quiet of the park, the only sounds being the distant chatter of children playing and the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. Malik leaned back, his head tilted to the sky, taking in the beauty of the evening. He was here, finally, with his mother, and in that moment, he realized that they didn't need a perfect history to move forward. What mattered was what they chose to create from here. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Judge Thompson asked, her voice quiet, as if the question itself was fragile. Malik looked at her, his heart full of love and understanding. "I do," he said softly. "It won't be easy, but I believe we can do it. We're both willing to try, and that's what matters." They sat in silence for a while, letting the peaceful evening wash over them. Malik had never imagined this moment, this connection could come so suddenly, but now that it had, he was holding on to it with everything he had. The first stars began to twinkle in the sky as the evening grew darker, and Malik realized that, for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. Not because everything had been fixed, but because he had finally found the courage to embrace the possibility of healing. His mother wasn't perfect, and neither was he, but they were both willing to try. That was enough. They had a long road ahead of them, but together, they could face anything. "I've always wanted to give you the life you deserved, Malik," Judge Thompson said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I see now that what you needed most was me. I'm so sorry it took me so long to realize that." Malik turned toward her, his hand resting on hers, offering a simple comfort. "You're here now," he replied. "That's all that matters. We have today, and we can make the most of it." There was no need for more words. In that moment, their connection was enough. The future was still uncertain, but they could face it with hope, side by side. As they walked back to the car, Malik felt the pull of something new, something he hadn't realized he was missing until now. The sense of belonging. The sense of family. He wasn't just a boy trying to survive anymore. He was a son, finally with his mother, and together, they would find their way. They would build a future not perfect, but real and filled with love, trust, and the strength to overcome the past. As they drove home that evening, Malik felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle in his heart. This was just the beginning. As Malik sat in the passenger seat, watching the streetlights pass by, a quiet realization began to settle in his heart. this wasn't just a reunion. This was a rebirth. The years of pain, the questions, the wondering about why his mother had disappeared, all of it had led him to this point. And for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. His life wasn't defined by the absence of his mother or the trial that had threatened to ruin him. He was the one in control of his story now. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about living. The drive back to Malik's childhood home was filled with an easy silence. Both of them seemed to be processing the events of the day, but this time, there was a comfort in the stillness. Judge Thompson, his mother, hadn't known what to expect either, but she was slowly finding peace in the fact that Malik wasn't angry with her anymore. He wasn't stuck in the hurt of the past. And as the years of estrangement seemed to melt away, the bond between them started to grow, slow and steady like the warming light of dawn. Malik noticed that his mother seemed lighter now, as though a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. There was a subtle joy in her smile, one that hadn't been there when they first met. She was reclaiming her own space in his life, and the more they spoke, the more Malik understood how deeply she had regretted leaving him. It wasn't just guilt, though. It was a realization that her choices had been based on fear, and fear, like pain, could cloud one's vision and decisions. But now, there was hope between them, and that gave them both strength. The conversation turned to simpler things, to life's small pleasures, what had changed in the years they were apart, and what Malik had been doing with his life. The talk was ordinary, but for both of them, it felt monumental. They spoke of favorite foods, places they had once wanted to visit, and the music they'd listened to growing up. It was a thread weaving them together again, connecting the dots of their separate lives into one. Malik talked about his grandmother, who had raised him with so much love and wisdom, and Judge Thompson listened intently. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Judge Thompson said softly. Malik smiled. "She was. She taught me everything I know about strength, about love, about forgiveness." The words hit Malik in a way he hadn't expected. He had never thought of it like that. How the love his grandmother had shown him was the foundation upon which he had built his own understanding of the world. Judge Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure she was proud of you. And she must have been a great support to you after I left." Malik looked out the window, taking a moment before answering. "She was my rock," he said, his voice steady. "But she always told me that life is about healing, and that even broken things can be put back together, slowly but surely." A lump formed in his throat. His grandmother had been right. It wasn't too late for him to heal. It wasn't too late for them both. They arrived at the house, a quiet, modest home surrounded by the familiar green of the trees in Malik's yard. He hadn't lived here in years, but the house still held echoes of his childhood, the laughter of his friends, the warmth of his grandmother's kitchen. It had been a place of safety for him, and now it felt like a starting point again. A place to rebuild not just his relationship with his mother, but his life, his sense of belonging. This house was no longer just a reminder of what he'd lost, it was a symbol of what they could still gain. Malik walked up to the front door, and for a moment, he hesitated. It wasn't just the house that had changed, it was him too. He was no longer the scared boy who had stood in this doorway, waiting for his mother to come back. He had grown into someone who had the courage to move forward, someone who could take the pain of his past and transform it into something better. He turned to his mother, who was standing beside him. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, a look of uncertainty in her eyes, but also something more, a flicker of hope. Inside the house, Malik led his mother through the familiar rooms, showing her where he had spent so many years. As they moved through the house, the memories began to flood back of his grandmother's laughter, of his own younger self running through the halls, of the quiet evenings spent together. The house, once full of quiet sorrow from her absence, now felt alive again, as if the walls were welcoming her back as much as Malik was. This wasn't just a visit, it was an invitation to something greater. They sat down in the living room, a room where so many memories had been made, both painful and beautiful. Malik's heart raced as he looked at the woman who had given him life, but who had also left him when he needed her most. "I know this house will never be the same," he said quietly. "But I want you to be a part of it again." Judge Thompson reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want to be here, to be a mother to you, to be a part of your life from now on." The conversation drifted to the future, and Malik found himself asking questions he hadn't thought to ask before. What did his mother hope for now? What dreams had she held onto during the years they were apart? Her response surprised him. "I want to build something real with you, Malik. I want to be the mother you deserve." I want to help you fulfill the dreams you've had, even if I've been gone all this time. Malik felt a surge of emotion as he looked at her. The future wasn't set in stone, but this was the first time he felt it was possible to shape it with her. The idea of the future, once so blurry, began to clear. Malik could see the possibility of something beautiful emerging from the rubble of their broken past. It wouldn't be without challenges, but he felt ready to face them. And his mother, despite her regrets and mistakes, was finally ready to face him too. The fear that had once dictated so many of their decisions was now being replaced by hope and determination. They had both lost time, but now they had the chance to make the most of what remained. The evening drew to a close, and Malik walked his mother to the door. "I'm glad you came home," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. She smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "I'm glad too. And I'll keep coming back, Malik. I promise you that." There was something deep in her words, something that made Malik believe her. In that moment, as they stood in the doorway of the house that had once felt like a place of loss, it now felt like a place of rebirth. And as the night settled around them, Malik understood that they weren't just healing from the past, they were creating a future. As he watched her drive away, Malik stood on the front porch, looking out into the quiet night. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known was possible. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about rebuilding. And for the first time in a long while, Malik believed that the pieces of his life could be put back together, not perfectly, but in a way that was real and meaningful. The next day they met again, not for anything grand, but just to spend time together. There were no expectations, only the simple joy of being present in each other's company. They went to a cafe, shared a meal, and talked about the ordinary things that were becoming extraordinary because they were now part of each other's lives. Slowly, they began to make new memories, little by little, day by day. And with each passing moment, the cracks in their relationship began to heal. Not in a rush, but steadily, like the gentle erosion of time. "Do you ever think about the life we could have had, if things had been different?" Malik asked one day, as they sat on a park bench, watching children run by. His mother thought for a moment before answering. "I think about it every day," she said softly. "But I also think that maybe, just maybe, we have the chance to create something new. And that, Malik, is something I'm willing to fight for." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of her words. This was it. They had been given a second chance, a gift they could choose to make the most of, together. And so they did. Together, they walked forward, day by day, choosing to embrace each moment, to heal the wounds of the past and build something beautiful. They didn't need to fix everything at once. What they needed most was to keep showing up for each other, to keep believing in the possibility of healing, of hope. And slowly, the love that had been lost in the past began to grow again, tender and strong. They had found a way to move forward, not as a perfect family, but as the weeks passed, Malik and Judge Thompson found a rhythm in their relationship that felt natural, despite the years of distance. They spent time doing ordinary things, walking in the park, cooking meals together, and sharing memories. Malik began to realize that healing wasn't just about fixing the past, it was about being present with one another, acknowledging the wounds, and making the choice to nurture something new. For the first time, he felt like he was building a future, not just surviving the remnants of his past. Every moment spent together felt like a small victory. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Malik asked her a question he had been holding in for a long time. "Do you ever regret leaving?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with both curiosity and vulnerability. Judge Thompson didn't answer right away. She seemed to be weighing the question in her mind, considering how to respond with the depth it deserved. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow, but also understanding. "Every day," she said softly. "But regret doesn't help us. It only keeps us trapped. I'm trying to move forward, Malik. With you." Malik nodded, his heart swelling with compassion for her. He could see the weight of her own guilt, the years of carrying that burden, alone. But Malik had come to understand that regret, while painful, was part of the process. It was a natural part of acknowledging one's mistakes. What mattered most was how they chose to use that regret. He had learned that forgiveness wasn't just for the person who had wronged you, it was something you did for yourself. And in that moment, Malik realized that he had forgiven his mother, not because she deserved it, but because he deserved peace. They began to talk about the future more often, not with pressure or expectations, but with the simple hope that they would continue to build something together. Malik had always dreamed of traveling, seeing the world beyond the confines of his hometown. He shared his dreams with Judge Thompson, and she listened intently, smiling with pride at his ambition. "What's stopping you?" she asked one evening, her voice filled with encouragement. "Life is too short to wait for the right moment. Go out there and make it happen." Those words stayed with Malik, a spark of inspiration that ignited something deep within him. A few weeks later, Malik found himself at the airport, standing in front of the departure gate with a one-way ticket to Europe. It was a leap of faith, a decision made not out of escape, but of a desire to experience something new, something beyond what he had always known. His mother stood beside him, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. "Promise me you'll come back," she said, her voice wavering. Malik smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'll come back when I've seen what I need to see," he said. "But I'm always coming back to you." As he boarded the plane, Malik's heart was a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. He had never imagined that his life would take this turn, that he would find himself leaving home to chase his dreams. But he was no longer that scared boy, waiting for things to happen to him. He was a young man, stepping boldly into his future. As the plane ascended into the sky, he thought about everything that had brought him here: the trial, the reunion with his mother, the forgiveness, the healing. He was free, in every sense of the word. And the world was waiting for him. While Malik was away, Judge Thompson continued to rebuild her own life. She focused on her work, her relationships, and the growth that was unfolding in her heart. The distance between her and Malik wasn't a cause for worry, it was a chance for both of them to flourish individually. She would often sit in her quiet office late at night, reading Malik's emails, telling her about his adventures, the people he met, and the sights he saw. She could hear the joy in his voice through his words, and it made her heart swell. This was what he needed, what he had always needed: a chance to find himself. One evening, after months of travel, Malik sent his mother a message, telling her about the quiet village he had settled in for a few days. "It's peaceful here," he wrote. "I think I'm beginning to understand what it means to be truly at peace. I don't know what comes next, but I feel like I'm on the right path." Judge Thompson read the words with a mixture of joy and bittersweet longing. She knew that Malik's journey was just beginning, and although it pained her to be apart from him, she also understood that he was living his truth. Malik's travels opened his eyes to new perspectives and experiences he had never imagined. He spent time in art galleries in Paris, walked the cobblestone streets of Rome, and had conversations with strangers that challenged the way he saw the world. For the first time in his life, Malik understood the power of being open to new possibilities, of embracing life's uncertainties. He began to write in a journal every night, capturing the moments that shaped him: the awe of seeing the Eiffel Tower for the first time, the kindness of a local shopkeeper, the quiet moments of solitude when he felt completely at peace. Each entry was a step in his own personal growth. One evening, as he sat on the balcony of his hotel room in Barcelona, watching the sunset over the Mediterranean, Malik received a call from his mother. "I've been thinking about you," she said softly. "I want to visit you, Malik. I want to see the world through your eyes." His heart swelled with love and gratitude. "I'd love that," he said. "But only if you're ready. This journey is about discovery, not just for me, but for both of us." They laughed together, the distance between them seeming smaller with every word exchanged. It felt right, like two people finding their way, but always in the same direction. When Judge Thompson arrived in Europe, she and Malik spent the next several weeks exploring the cities he had grown to love. They walked along the Seine River, admiring the art and architecture, and spent afternoons in cafes, talking about everything and nothing. It was in these simple moments that they began to build a relationship grounded in the shared experiences they were now creating. There was no rushing, only the slow unfolding of understanding, the kind of connection that could only come with time, patience, and a willingness to embrace what life offered. One day, as they stood in front of the Colosseum in Rome, Malik looked at his mother, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This is what it's all been: for the moments, the memories. We're finally here together." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We are," she said, her voice steady with emotion. "And I'm so proud of you, Malik. You've come so far. You've created the life you always deserved, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it." As they continued their travels, Malik and his mother had conversations that touched on everything from philosophy to the meaning of home. Malik had learned that home wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. It was the sense of belonging, of being seen, understood, and loved. He had found that with his mother, despite the years of separation, and now, he felt the warmth of her presence in ways he never had before. They had both come to understand that life was a journey, not a destination, and that each step they took together was a step toward healing. After several months of traveling, Malik returned home to the States, but his perspective had changed. He wasn't the same person who had left. He had learned to embrace the uncertainty of life, to step into the unknown without fear. His relationship with his mother had grown into something real, something enduring. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough. The love between them had blossomed into something stronger, and as they settled back into their lives, Malik knew that the road ahead was filled with endless possibilities, all of which they would face together, real one. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, share your thoughts in the comment section, and also help to share this video for others to learn from it. Until next time. Have a good day.